Hello, I'm Hallam-Baker and this is Bitcoin, a Skeptical View. If you've been following the news recently, Bitcoin's been quite hard to ignore. In the course of less than a year, it's gone from a few tens of dollars to over 1,000. And, who can argue with such runaway success? If you put your money in a year ago, you've got 100 times as much back. Well, I'm a security guy, so I'm always skeptical. But what makes me most skeptical is what I hear from the Bitcoin supporters. When I ask questions, I don't get answers. I get, well, why are you asking that question? Why are you being so negative? Well, I'm a security guy. We ask hard questions. That's what we do. People hire us to find out the problems. People don't hire security people to say, hey, you're doing well. The other things that's a big red flag for me is when people are saying, the old rules don't apply because this is all new. Well, it's not really as new as they imagine. But when I'm talking to these 20-year-olds about Bitcoin, I'm thinking, I've been doing internet payments before you were born. But, another thing that happened before that you probably can't remember is the dot-com boom of the late 90s, when a lot of people were saying, well, the old rules don't apply, we've got to have new ways of valuing stocks. Oh yeah, and how did that turn out? That old rules don't apply thing, that's so last millennium. And finally there's, well, you can't prove it's a scam. And, that really sets me off. Because when people are saying that they have a whole new payment system, a whole new currency, a whole new way of moving value in the world, the onus of proof is on them. They're the ones who are proposing the new scheme. They're the ones who have to show that it works. They're the ones that have to show that it is fraud-proof. They're the ones that have to prove that it is better than the old. It's not for me to prove that Bitcoin is bad. They have to prove that it's better. And the thing that makes me most skeptical of all is when people are saying, maybe you're not smart enough to understand. Yes. And those are fighting words. I mean, particularly when I see them said to other people. Because what I really don't like is when people are trying to bully other people out of what I believe are perfectly rational opinions. And when I started talking on these Bitcoin forums, I got pretty much the same response. You don't understand! Well, I've been doing internet payments for over 20 years. I've been doing web security for over 20 years. I don't have a degree in nuclear physics, but I do have a degree in computer science from the Oxford University Nuclear Physics Laboratory. If somebody with a degree in nuclear physics and 20 years experience can't understand some new scheme, the problem might not be with the person, the problem might be with the scheme. And when people are saying, well, maybe you don't understand, well, that's the way a lot of scams work. They gull the person into thinking that they can get in on this opportunity because they're one of the few people smart enough to understand it. And of course, the fable that's based on that is Hans Christian Andersen, the Emperor's New Clothes. He had the tailors told him, well, we've got this fine suit, but people won't be able to see it unless they're clever enough to see it. Now, the thing that's always worried me about that particular story is, why did the king actually want a suit of clothes that stupid people couldn't see? I mean, what's the advantage? And it's the same problem with Bitcoin. What is so great about this Bitcoin thing? They have to prove a real and dramatic advantage. The fact that a few thousand libertarians are getting their jollies moving bitcoins between wallets really doesn't prove that the whole basis of Western civilization is about to change. Another thing that isn't proof is growth. Having been involved in the early web when we had the web growing at 140% a week, I'm pretty used to some very, very rapid exponential growth. But the thing is that when the web was growing that fast, we knew that it couldn't last. In fact, it couldn't last till the end of the year, because if it kept growing at its current rate, every internet user would be a web user by the end of the year. And there were 1 million internet users at the time, and it would take a lot longer than a year to put the whole planet on the web, because you have to lay fibre, you have to get them computers and all that other thing. In the end, it took us over 10 years to get the internet up to 2 billion users. It's going to happen. It's obviously, it was obviously the wave of the future, but it wasn't going to happen overnight. And the other thing that wasn't inevitable is it wasn't inevitable that the web would be the network hypertext information system that would win. There could have been other systems come in and grow faster and overtake us. It could have been a bubble that collapsed just as quickly as it grew. And having been involved in the early web, I saw a lot of bubbles grow and then burst. Now, according to some people, Pets.com, Webvan, GovWorks, Flues and so on, they were the real failures of the dot-com boom. But that's imprecise. They were the spectacular bankruptcies of the dot-com boom. And they were certainly a failure if you were one of the investors unlucky enough to lose their money when the stock price went zzz. If you got in early enough, if you were on the venture capitalists or the angel investors who got in on the ground floor and got out as soon as the company went public, you probably made a large amount of money, because all that money the late shareholders lost, that was the profits of the people who were the early investors. The fact that something is growing and has got $1 billion of market cap doesn't mean that it is bound to succeed. They can fade just as quickly as they grew, if not faster. And this leads me on to the problem that I see as I call excusifying. When I raise a problem with Bitcoin, I get excuses back. I point out, well, what's backing Bitcoin? And they say, well, nothing backs the US dollar either. Well, no, that's not true, because I can pay my taxes in US dollars. And in fact, I'm required to pay my taxes in US dollars. So I have to earn a certain amount of money in US dollars. That's not true of Bitcoin. Another thing, when I come up with some sort of like technical issue, they'll say, we'll fix that in the next generation. But I'll come to this more precisely in the next episode. One of the things about Bitcoin is that the way that there is such confidence in the system is that it's impossible for anybody to cheat, because everything is nailed down cryptographically. And that's a problem, because everything is fixed at the point at which Bitcoin was launched. There is no process for changing the way Bitcoin works. And so, because we don't even know where the inventor is. We've got no governance council that can make decisions. And so, if there's a problem, it's going to be difficult to fix, if not impossible. Another excusification is telling me that the outcome is going to justify all the initial inconvenience. Okay, yes, it takes 10 minutes before you know that a person's given you money. It's another hour before you can be sure that it's settled, and so on. But this is all inconvenience we can put up with because it's going to be a whole new world. Yeah, but why is Bitcoin actually any better than what we've got already? Now, the Bitcoin supporters have an answer to that, and it's a logically sound argument. It's just an argument that proceeds from a set of libertarian ideological convictions that I don't personally hold, and I don't think the vast majority of the population hold either. I happen to think that good government, is a good thing. And so designing a currency system that is better because it does not require a government does not necessarily give me a sense of warm jollies and happiness. And finally, there's the thing, well, just give us a chance. Just give us a chance to prove ourselves, which, in ordinary circumstances, maybe I'd be prepared to do. Only they are taking in rather a lot of money from people who think that they're going to make a lot of money by being early investors in something that's not backed by assets, yes. And the other thing is that this cryptocurrency has already caused 8.25 million tons of carbon emissions. This is not a green technology by any sense of the imagination. It has consumed as much electricity as the island of Cyprus. That's a nation state. And what's worse is that the amount of electricity it uses will grow exponentially. So in a few years, if it succeeds on the basis that some of its boosters are saying, Bitcoin will be consuming as much electricity as the country of Germany. That is not sustainable. That is not acceptable. And there's an iron law of economics. Things that cannot continue forever don't. The world is simply not going to put up with a cryptocurrency or any other endeavour that requires that amount of power and that amount of scarce fossil fuels. We need those resources for other things, not for creating your libertarian utopia. Thank you very much. So the way that I've structured this presentation is in two parts. In this part, part one, I'm going to be looking at a history of internet currencies and all the things that were like Bitcoin that went before. And this really explores myth zero of Bitcoin, which is that it is so new and unprecedented that nobody understands it. That's completely wrong because I've been following these now for 20 years. And the second part, I'll look at Bitcoin in particular and the specific Bitcoin technology and show that there are problems lurking there as well. The second part is, the first part is the bigger criticism because these are problems with every internet currency, problem with Bitcoin and all the competitors, Litecoin, Namecoin and what have you. The second part is rather less critical because if it's a problem with Bitcoin, well, we could just create a new currency to replace it. But in this presentation, I'm going to be explaining why that might be a little bit harder than people imagine. So, a brief history of internet currencies. And by internet currencies, I'm meaning something that is a store of value rather than a payment system, which is a means of transferring value in some existing some existing banking scheme. When I was involved in internet payments, the way I got involved was that I was working on the web at CERN, and Tim Berners-Lee comes into my office one day. He's very excited. Well, of course, Tim's always excited. And he said, "Somebody put a shop on the web. We need security. How are people going to pay for things?" And there was a shop, yeah, but to pay for things on the shop, you had to send in a fax with the credit card number. And this was not optimal. So he wanted cryptography, and because I did that sort of thing, and because I had intelligence services spying on me, he chose me for this security guy. So payment schemes, we're moving money from one account to another, and the only thing that makes them internet payment schemes is how do we make those existing systems accessible from the web? How do we use credit cards on the web? How do you use ACH transfers, bank wire transfers on the web? And this is what makes eBay and Amazon and all the rest of electronic commerce possible. Internet currencies are rather different because there we're trying to establish a monetary system on the internet itself that doesn't have any existing predecessor. It's not part of the banking system. This is a whole new thing entirely. And why would you want to do that? Well, The reason that we were so interested in it was this guy, David Chow. He gave the keynote at the first web conference at CERN, and he developed a system called electronic cash, and his argument was fairly simple. In the regular world, you use cash and it provides anonymity. I can go to a store, I can buy a book, I can buy candy or whatever, I can pay with cash and I can leave, and afterwards the shopkeeper can see the book's gone from his shelf, the money's in his till, but he's got no way of tracking that payment to me through the money system. This was before every store had CCTV cameras and all that stuff. So what he was saying was that we need the same thing online. Cash allows anonymity. We need to have that same anonymity online so that people can buy books and so on without feeling that somebody's watching over them, and so we need digital cash. Chow attempted to commercialize his system through a company called DigiCash. And the way that the system works is really fascinating if you're a cryptography geek like myself, in that it was one of the first protocols that showed just how flexible public key cryptography could be if it was used imaginatively. Using a technique called blind signatures, DigiCash allows an anonymous payment system in which numbers represent coins, and the coins can be transferred from one person to another in a way that is unlinkable. So if Bob gives some money to Carol, well, Alice can't see that that transaction's going on. Well, that's a fairly simple criteria to meet. But with the Chowian system, Alice can receive $10 from somebody and know why she's received it, but not know who had paid her. And that allows some very strong privacy guarantees. And those privacy guarantees led to DigiCash being formed in Holland, the Netherlands. And the reason that Amsterdam was the logical place is that in the Low Countries, personal privacy is considered to be a national security issue. Notice I didn't say on a par with a national security issue. They consider it as a cultural matter to be a national security concern in its own right. And the reason for this has to do with what happened in World War II, when the Netherlands and the Low Countries were invaded by Nazi Germany, and being an efficient Northern European Protestant country, they'd applied all the principles of Prussian bureaucracy in the Victorian times, and so they had meticulously kept records of everyone and everywhere. And so when the Nazis wanted to find out who the trade unionists, the communists and the Jews were, all the records had existed in the government records office, and all they needed to do was to read them. And so as a cultural issue, the Dutch government was very concerned about the possibility that toll booth records might be an invasion of privacy. And if you're wanting to build tunnels and make them toll tunnels and have wireless transponders to collect the tolls, well, this is obviously a concern. Now this turned out to also be an example of how a technology doesn't make a system. The payment system was wonderfully anonymous. But when you put it together into a toll collection system, the anonymity was lost immediately. See, the thing is that a toll booth system needs to do more than just collect tolls from the people willing to pay them. They also have to cope with 1–2% of people who don't want to pay and are going to drive straight through the toll booths. They're going to drive through unless there's somebody to either stop them or there's some way of tracking them down and forcing them to pay a fine. And of course, the way that you track them down is you have a camera with vehicle license plate number recognition on it, and it sees the camera of the scofflaw driving through it sees the license plate of the scofflaw going through the toll booth without paying, and you can go around and collect the fine from them. The problem is the camera's also looking at all the license plates of all the cars who paid their tolls as well. And so it completely blows a hole in the payment system, anonymity. So this brings us to a second myth, which is that Bitcoin is anonymous. Chow wasn't successful in getting people to use digital cash, but he was successful in convincing a lot of people that anonymity was an essential requirement for an electronic payment system. And so when Bitcoin started, well, it's a successful electronic payment system. Of course it must be anonymous. Which is strange because it's completely not anonymous. Every Bitcoin transaction is visible and linkable. In fact, that's the very core of the Bitcoin technology. There is this blockchain that has a list of every transaction that has happened in Bitcoin from year 0 into the future. Bitcoin isn't anonymous. But people imagine it is because they've heard about this charming technology that was anonymous that went before it. There is one party that's anonymous though, and that's the creator. He's known by the handle Satoshi Nakamoto, which sounds Japanese, but we've got reason to believe he's either British or Irish because he spells colour with a U. He's the only person who has anonymity in the Bitcoin system, in that he proposed this system, he wrote the code, threw it over the wall, people started using it, and in 2011 he just simply vanished. Nobody knows where he is, nobody's heard from him, and he is sitting on a wallet. He's sitting on wallets containing approximately 1 million Bitcoins, which is kind of interesting. And you might be saying, well, you know, it's the technology that matters. You know, why are you casting aspersions on Satoshi? Well, the thing is that Bitcoin is throwing out some pretty strong allegations about the untrustworthiness of banks and of governments. Shouldn't the people behind it be subject to the same degree of scrutiny? By 1995, the internet and the web had moved on, and we could see where we were going. And you know, Tim's talking about creating a whole new world. We've got a solution by that time that can allow the store to accept credit card payments, and that's going pretty well. What we don't have is a good solution for people who are trying to sell content. You know, newspapers, people writing short stories, people having websites of news and views and all that other stuff. And the problem here is that the credit card system has two parts. When you make the merchant has two fees. First of all, there's a fixed charge regardless of the size of the transaction, and then there's a small percentage on top. And the problem was that in the mid-90s, the flat fee per transaction was about 50 cents, which meant that if you were going to sell the New York Times online, which in those days I think cost about 50 cents, that meant that if you charge the same online as in real life, well, you know, all that money is going to the payment processor. The New York Times isn't getting any of it. And that seems wrong. So a lot of people, myself included, were looking into the problem of how could we create a payment system that would allow very small transfers of money. And, you know, there are all these systems. One part of that story that's very relevant to Bitcoin is when I met Steve Crocker, who'd founded this company called CyberCash that was trying this cybercoin scheme. He told me there were 3 problems of micropayments. And they were double spending, and double spending. And this is really the reason why internet payment schemes are just so hard. The thing is that if I have a dollar bill and I give you that dollar bill, well, you have the dollar bill and I don't. So the value has transferred with the physical object. If we're going to turn information into a currency and I give you that piece of information, well, when I give the information to you, you have it, but I still have it as well. And I might then go to somebody else and spend that same money with somebody else. And so there is this non-rival goods aspect of information that make it a very difficult environment to create a currency scheme. And when we get into part 2, we'll see that the real technical contribution that Bitcoin made was it provides a brilliant technical solution to this problem of double spending without requiring a single transaction log maintained by a single authority to record all the transactions. And we'll get to why that's important in a moment. So it's a brilliant piece of technology, but not necessarily the future of payments. As it happened, well, micropayments didn't really go anywhere for a variety of reasons. One of them was that we just couldn't get a big enough community of micropayment users because, well, you know, there's all this free stuff on the web. Why would you want to pay for stuff? And so the web quickly settled on advertising as a model. In recent years, people have started to see the limitations of advertising as the model simply because most of the advertising goes to the search engines and the payment gateways, and there's very little left for the actual content providers, the people who are providing the information that people ultimately want to find. And so we may see a return to looking at micropayment schemes and new currency transfer systems on the web, and I'd hope to see that. But as I say, I don't think that Bitcoin is the answer there either. So while we were doing all this micropayment stuff, a group of people were getting really excited by gold. And by really excited, I mean really, really, really excited, because, you know, a currency backed by gold, well, it's backed by gold, isn't it? You know, it's gold. There were quite a few of these schemes. They quickly kind of consolidated. They were all based in the Caribbean, which seemed to be, well, you know, the weather's nice, it's not under US jurisdiction, there are all these internet casinos nearby that we can serve, you know, we can have party time there. And so, you know, there were about half a dozen of these schemes. The best known of them was a company called eGold, which was based in St Kitts and Nevis, which is in the Caribbean. I hadn't heard of it until I saw eGold launch. But it was operated from Florida. That's where they had their data center. And as we'll see, that turned out to be very significant. And this was a digital currency that was backed by cold, hard, solid gold. And, you know, you could go to the website and see the serial numbers of the gold bars, of the bullion that they had on store. Quite what that proved, I never quite understood, you know, because, you know, if I trust you to write that website and tell me the truth, well, isn't that just the same as trusting you to tell me that you got the gold bar? I mean, you know, what does telling me the serial number prove if I've got no way of verifying it? By the time it collapsed, it was processing $2 billion a year in payments, which may or may not be comparable to Bitcoin. I don't know how big the trade in Bitcoin is really. You know, I can look at graphs that'll show me how fast Bitcoins are moving between wallets, but you know, we also know that there are some people who've invested, you know, 10, 50, $100 million in Bitcoins in the belief that they're going to go up and up and up and up. Well, you know, if I'd done that, I'd kind of be churning my Bitcoins between my wallets constantly to try and create some buzz and convince people that now's the time to move into this currency. So there was some real economic activity in eGold. But, and the reason for this was that Bitcoin had two major advantages and two major problems. And they were the same. The advantages were that transactions settled instantly. If you tried to move money internationally, you'll know that, you know, the international payment system's a joke. It's expensive and it is slow, and oh goodness help you if you're trying to do it at a UK high street bank. They've got no clue what's going on. The other advantage is that transactions are irrevocable once they settle. The reason that merchants like that is that if you're going to run a casino online or do something like that, well, you don't want somebody to be able to say, okay, I place this bet, and now I don't want to place the bet anymore. Oh dear, my money's gone. You want to have finality into the money going into the gambling account or whatever. And in the credit card system, because it is set up to protect consumers, every transaction can be unwound, and merchants can't take their money out of the credit card system until quite some time, 30 days, 45 days, has elapsed, which is one of the controls in place to make sure that they're not committing frauds. Now, originally, eGold told everybody, well, the transactions, once they clear, are irrevocable. But as the complaints started to mount up, well, they started to reverse some of them, and so they were not really all that irrevocable as it turned out. In effect, what was happening was that the transactions are irrevocable unless eGold decides to revoke them, which is not really the same thing, is it? And there were plenty of scams. There were auction frauds. In the days before PayPal or whatever, people selling stuff online would say, oh, pay me in eGold. And then somebody's kind of like, well, in those days, you're having to go through flip-flops to move money online. You understand it. How am I going to get this currency to this person? Okay, I'll do this. And so people would start their eGold account, put the money in and do all the stuff, give them the cash, and then a week later, the parcel hasn't arrived with the computer or the laptop, whatever. They start to complain, and by that time, the seller has got the money cashed out of their account, and they're miles away, and are never going to be found. There were thefts. In fact, this was the first time that we started to see malware and other types of viruses being used for fraud. And you'll be thinking, well, hang on a sec. If eGold has got 10,000, 100,000 users, and there's a billion people on the web, how do the hackers know that they're going to get somebody with an eGold wallet? Well, you're not thinking like a hacker. You see, the thing is that most of the people who were involved in eGold were kind of like of the hacker mentality. And so if you wanted to steal money from people, a good way to do it was you'd write a hacker tool or take one off the net, and you'd put a backdoor in it. And then you put it onto another site and you'd say, hey, look, hacker tool, press the button and it'll hack sites for you. And so, people of a criminal persuasion start doing this. They start getting up to mischief, cell phone fraud and all that sort of stuff. And, they're also heeding the advice of the person who gave them the tool and say, oh yeah, you've got to get eGold. Because, that's untraceable. Make sure that nobody can trace that fraud back to you. And then, after the, script kiddie wannabe hacker criminal has stolen a bunch of money from somewhere or whatever and put it into eGold, well, they've got the back door on the wallet and they just steal the money and they can run off. And there are also a bunch of what they call high yield investment programs, or to you, a Ponzi scheme. eGold, it did have some legitimate purposes, but the possibility that a currency might be used for a legitimate purpose, well, it's not exactly a high bar that is being set here. And when I was talking to, when the phishing scandals and internet crime really started to get going in the early thousands, I'm talking to the Secret Service and the FBI and the Postal Inspectorate, and they really, really hate eGold. This is one of the things that actually tipped me off to the fact that the eGold ecospace has actually got anywhere. eGold enabled criminal activity. It was enabling child abuse, it was enabling gambling, and whether you think that gambling should or should not be legal, it's illegal, and the feds try to stop it. It was also being used for busting sanctions. In 2006, eGold suddenly suspended a whole set of hundreds of accounts held by Iranian users. And they're complaining, we've lost millions of dollars here. And this was because the feds had raided eGold and said, you can't deal with Iran. There's an absolute prohibition on you as American citizens having any commercial relationships with Iran whatsoever. And it doesn't matter whether your company is headquartered in St. Kitts or anywhere. It's illegal to do that. Eventually eGold paid $3 million in fines over that, but as we'll see, by then their legal problems were a lot deeper than just sanctions busting. Another early eGold problem was Osgold. This was a Ponzi scheme that started in 2001. It offered 30% compound interest if you kept your money in for 3 months. And if you kept your money in for a whole year, you get 45% return on your money. Only you wouldn't, because the scheme collapsed within a year and $250 million was lost. So $250 million loss. They caught up with the perpetrator behind the scheme in 2009, and last year he got a 51-month federal prison sentence, which isn't that bad for $250 million. Quite a lot of people would probably spend 4.5 years in club fed for $250 million if you kept any of it. eGold started to get nervous about its position in about 2004, and they asked the US Treasury if it was in compliance. And they didn't get a response until a few years later, when the response came back saying eGold doesn't meet our definition of currency, and therefore eGold cannot be licensed as a money transmittal service. And the eGold company, they blasted this all over the net saying, hey, we're legitimate because we can't be licensed as a money transmittal service, we're not a money transmittal service. A few weeks later, they're raided by the FBI and the Secret Service and charged with operating an unlicensed money transmittal service. And this really demonstrates the difference between the regulator's mentality and the police mentality. You see, if you're dealing with police, then the question is, can the police prove that you're breaking the law? If you're dealing with a regulator, the question is, can I prove that I'm in compliance with the regulations? And if I'm not in compliance with the regulation, I cannot be licensed. And if I'm not licensed and I'm doing anything that looks like something that I need to be licensed for, then I am breaking the law and the police take over. I see exactly the same set of arguments being made about Bitcoin. People are saying, it's too new, the regulations haven't caught up with it. Well, you know what? The regulations may not have caught up with you, but the law has anticipated exactly what you've done decades ago. This isn't new activity. Another of the eGold scams that metastasized was the GoldAge scam. GoldAge was started as an exchange for eGold and some other currencies in 2001, and it was raided fairly soon after it started, and the principals were told that you're enabling money transmittal to all these bad guys, stop it, cut it out. 5 years later they were raided again, and the principals were indicted and charged with unlicensed operation of a money transmittal service, money laundering. They were convicted and received 5-year general sentences, which were then reduced to 5 years probation. Not that it really mattered, because 2 of them then skipped bail and skipped their probation and fled to Costa Rica and founded a new company called Liberty Reserve. And according to the federal indictment handed down last year, Liberty Reserve was from day one designed to be a facilitator for money laundering for the drug dealers. It was also involved in another whole rash of Ponzi schemes and high yield investment programs, etc., etc., etc. And the gold age collapse actually meshes very closely with the rise of Bitcoin. What are the drug dealers going to do? if their money mover of the week has changed, well, they'll go and find another. And Bitcoin was there. They chose Bitcoin. So this brings us to myth 3, which is the claim that Bitcoin is government proof. And here, the lack of action by the feds does not mean that there's a lack of interest. Are you really willing to risk jail for your Bitcoin? The feds have already taken some fairly serious action. There was a marketplace called Silk Road that was taking place in this mysterious place called the Darknet. This is one of those things about internet culture that I don't get. You know, people tell me, oh, there's parts of the net that you can't see, and I'm thinking, no, I'm pretty sure I can see them if I want to find them, and I'm pretty sure that so are the police if they want to. It billed itself as the eBay for drugs, and you could buy drugs and child porn and anything you wanted there. It was up for a few years, and it was shut down with great prejudice last year. The founder is currently in jail, facing a whole rash of charges, including attempted murder. He got upset with some of his rivals, tried to hire a hitman to murder them, and of course was trying to pay with Bitcoin. One of the large Bitcoin exchanges was taken down after the founder was indicted. There's currently, case being prosecuted in there, and the feds have also taken action against Mt. Gox, which is the largest of the Bitcoin exchanges, or rather was before they took action, and they have seized so far a total of $5 million from accounts that were held by Mt. Gox, with the effect that now you cannot transfer money out of Mt. Gox into US dollars. So that brings us to myth 4, which is that Bitcoin is legal. The coins themselves, they're just numbers, and numbers are neither legal or illegal. It's what you do with them that matters. And running any form of Bitcoin exchange is almost certainly running a money transmittal service, and if you're an unlicensed money transmittal service, you're very definitely breaking the law. Mining, holding, accepting Bitcoin in payments may or may not be legal, but here's the catch. We all know that a large amount of Bitcoin activity is unambiguously legal. Now, if the Attorney General, or the President, or the head of the FBI was to come to me and say, how would you shut down Bitcoin? We've got fed up of it. We want to stop the kiddie porn. We want to stop the gambling. We want to stop this challenge to the Federal Reserve. How do you do it? I'd say, well, go to the RICO statutes. Say that anybody using Bitcoin is part of the Bitcoin organization. And if you look at how RICO has been used in the past, calling Bitcoin an organization may sound a stretch, but it's not much more of a stretch than ones they've done already and sent people to jail for. And the thing about the RICO statutes is that if you're found guilty, and if you're charged under RICO, you can be charged with any crime committed by any person committed by a member of that organization. And so, why not just pick up some people who are using Bitcoin, making themselves very, very visible users of Bitcoin, and charge them with the kiddie porn and the drugs and all the rest, and see how they like spending 2 years fighting off a RICO prosecution. So Bitcoin may or not be legal, but you know what? It probably doesn't matter, because what matters is, can the authorities get the law to prosecute you? And they certainly can. And even if it turns out that the law does not technically cover Bitcoin today, it can be changed with a simple administrative act. It doesn't require an act of Congress to change the rules of the Federal Reserve, and they're what regulate banking. So what do you want from a currency? At a very minimum, what you want is a store of value and ability to transfer value from one person to another. It could be tobacco, which was used in the early colonies. It could be these things, cowrie shells. It could be gold. But what really matters is that you can store value and transfer it to other people. Beyond that, what you want beyond that depends upon what what your personal taste in payment system is. I like credit card payments as a credit card user because every transaction is insured. If I use my credit card online and something bad happens, I'm not the person on the hook. The card issuer or the merchant is on the hook. I'm going to be held harmless even if it's my fault. Chargebacks mitigate fraud. If the merchant accepts money from somebody, it turns out the card is stolen, the transaction reversed, and the merchant is out the money. And so the problem of mitigating internet fraud is pushed back from the user to the internet merchant. And every party in this system is accountable. The banks, the merchants, and the payment processors. And all of that accountability protects me as a user. That's what I look for in an internet payment system. And I don't see any of those protections in Bitcoin. What the Bitcoin people are talking about is this. In the past, the dollar was backed by gold, and now it's backed by brute government force. Well, if you buy into that ideology, okay. But you know what? I like a currency that's backed by the government. I like a currency that is backed, I like a banking system that is backed by government regulation. In the early part of the 20th century, the banking system collapsed repeatedly in North America. There were a whole series of bank collapses that ended up with the creation of the Federal Reserve System. And in the 1930s, the banks failed in the Great Depression, and that was what led to the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. I wouldn't consider putting money into a bank that wasn't insured by the FDIC, and neither should you, or whatever the equivalent is in your jurisdiction. But the only way that the feds can insure the bank deposits is if they regulate the way that banks act and make sure that they're not doing stupid things with them or acting as a Ponzi scheme. And when bank regulations get weakened, often for political benefits, that's the point where the banking system collapses and we as taxpayers end up holding the baby. So what backs Bitcoin? Well, it's tempting to say that nothing backs Bitcoin, but that's not quite true. Every currency is, in the final analysis, a consensual illusion. And it's just the same as gold, as any other system. What backs Bitcoin is that consensual illusion that people are willing to accept it in payment in the belief that somebody else will ultimately accept it in payment down the line. In the case of Bitcoin, of course, there's also this belief that it's going to double in value maybe before they hand it on. The difference, as I see it, between the US dollar that is backed by an extremely stable government and Bitcoin is the strength of the consensual illusion. The consensual illusion behind the US dollar is bigger than the United States. It's probably the biggest element in US soft power. The US dollar is accepted worldwide as currency. There's a huge demand for $100 US bills, even though they're barely seen in the US itself, because they're a convenient form of currency. And those are mostly used outside the US. The consensual illusion behind Bitcoin is really based on a libertarian ideology, and the problem here is it's a rather fragile illusion. I'm into modernist cuisine, I have a rotovap, I have a sous vide machine, I've done the making ice cream with liquid nitrogen thing. And a couple of years ago I was getting really excited about this liquid nitrogen ice cream thing, to the point of thinking, I'll start a ice cream parlour in Cambridge, and $25 worth of cream, 10 cents worth of liquid nitrogen, put the two together, and you've got a $5 gourmet dessert. Oh yeah, I could imagine selling those in large numbers to those Harvard Law School students. And I got fairly far down the line, point of looking at sites, talking to a restaurateur about costs and so on, and then suddenly I was just at the point of filing for a federal trademark on nitro cream, and I had to abandon the whole project because it was doomed to failure. And the problem here was the brittleness of the plan. You see, the craze had already hit the UK, and one bartender in one bar in the UK served one cocktail, and that brought the whole craze to a shuddering halt. The cocktail had either too much liquid nitrogen in it, or it hadn't been allowed to settle long enough for the nitrogen to evaporate. An 18-year-old kid, out on her 18th birthday, drinks the cocktail. It burns the inside of her stomach. She has to have her stomach removed. She almost dies from this cocktail. And I'm thinking, there's no way that we can risk that. You see, the thing is that it doesn't matter how careful I am. It doesn't matter how effective my procedures are to stop that from happening. If that happens once in any parlour, whether it's mine or one of my copycats, that's the end of the whole craze. The whole thing's over. The whole franchise is busted. We'll have to file for bankruptcy. Because the first time that happens, that's going to be the end of the craze, and nobody's going to want the nitro ice cream from anybody. The reason I decided to make this podcast now, rather than wait a few weeks, is that something very similar might be happening to Bitcoin right now. This is a graph of the price of Bitcoin over the past month. And as you can see, the price of Bitcoin has dropped very sharply over the past weekend. It's dropped from well over $900 to $600 in a day. And sometime this morning, the price has been reported as $500. I'm not sure what it is right now because I've been making this podcast all day. So what's going on there? Well, people have been posting articles saying that something fishy might be going on at Mt. Gox for quite some time. In particular, the price of Bitcoin at Mt. Gox has been significantly higher than at the other exchanges. And that really shouldn't be happening if there was an efficient market in Bitcoin, because people would be performing arbitrage. They'd be buying Bitcoin at the exchanges where it was cheaper and then selling it on Mt. Gox where that price was higher. Only that wasn't possible because it's not been possible to withdraw Bitcoin effectively from Mt. Gox for over a month now. There have been a series of failed transactions, and people have been saying, well, is there something rotten in the system here? And this really came to a head last Friday when suddenly Mt. Gox announced that they were suspending all internet payment, all withdrawals in Bitcoin completely. And again this morning they've announced that, well, they're saying, oh, we've got this technical problem, whatever, bear with us, trust us. Yeah, this is really interesting, where the people say, you can't trust the government, are saying, oh, you got to trust us, bear with us. Yes, I think we should trust you to exactly the same extent that you told us we could trust the government, okay? And so the question is, is Mt. Gox going to turn out to be some sort of bizarre Ponzi scheme? Have they been cheating by causing transactions to fail and so on? We don't yet know. But the fact that it has come into question should make a lot of people think twice about Bitcoin. You see, the thing is that I really don't believe that Bitcoin could survive the collapse of Mt. Gox. If that happens, the media bubble is over, and so probably is the currency. And this brings me up to my last myth of this particular podcast, which is that volatility doesn't matter. Volatility certainly doesn't matter when the price of Bitcoin is going up and up and up. You know, if there's a bubble going on in a commodity and the price is going up, nobody complains that what they have is worth twice as much a week later. Nobody. You know, if I work for somebody for a day and they say, I'll pay you in Bitcoin, it's worth twice as much when I come to cash it out, you know, I'm a really happy camper. But if it's worth half as much, if the price is falling, oh yes, now there I've got problems. You see, the thing is, when the price is falling, I've got my rent to pay in dollars, I've got my groceries, I've got my fuel, I've got my car. The price going up is a nice bonus. The price going down can put me into bankruptcy. So I can't accept payment for my labour in a volatile currency. I have to insist on cold hard cash because that is the currency in which my obligations are denominated. And this is something that I find really interesting about Bitcoin stores. Yes, I can use Bitcoins to buy something. I can use Bitcoins as a money transfer system. But look carefully. When I go to bitcoinstore.com, when I go to the other Bitcoin stores that accept Bitcoin, they will give me the price of the article in Bitcoin. But the real's price is set in dollars. And if the dollar Bitcoin exchange rate changes, so will the price in Bitcoin. So I'm not buying things in Bitcoin denominated currency. I've not got obligations in a Bitcoin denominated currency. There are obligations in US dollars, and we're just using Bitcoin to affect the payment transfer. That's a very different thing from saying we've got an online currency, we've got Bitcoin. So this brings us to the end of the first podcast. So in summary, Bitcoin is certainly not inevitable, it's not anonymous, it's not government proof, it probably isn't legal, and the volatility in Bitcoin matters a whole heap. But these aren't just criticisms of Bitcoin, they're really criticism of Bitcoin and all the Me Too electronic cryptocurrency schemes that have popped up in its wake. Bitcoin, they apply to Bitcoin, but they apply just as much to Litecoin, Namecoin, and all the other wannabes. So that brings us to the end of part one. In the next part, I'll look at Bitcoin itself and make some criticism of the actual operation of Bitcoin as opposed to its competitors. Now, this is not quite so important as these complaints because these are issues that could, in theory, be fixed. It's the fact that I don't see any fixes for the social problems I've been discussing today that means it's probably not worth bothering. So I'm going to be talking about how Bitcoin works. I'm going to be talking about Hashcash, which is a very closely related system that it's based on. I'm going to be talking about what the blockchain is. I'm also going to be dealing with Bitcoin mining, which is now the world's biggest supercomputer is the aggregation of Bitcoin mining engines. And if there's time, we'll also look at some Bitcoin applications, in particular Bitcoin gambling, which I was very excited about it when I started looking at it, because they're saying, oh, we've got a way of online gambling which is verifiable, which I found really interesting, because if somebody says, we can prove it, we're trustworthy, we can prove it, that's something that interests me a great deal. And I'll also show you the ways that I found that I think you can cheat. So that's for part two. Thank you for watching this presentation. As I said before, if you've got a kid, think about putting your kid's college fund into Bitcoin, particularly if you don't like them or you think they might be happier as a plumber. But also, please click the like button. and subscribe to my channel. Help get the word out, and please stay tuned to part 2. Thank you very much for your time.